The last 3 weeks of our gospel lessons, we have had these conversations of Jesus with various people in the gospel according to John. And conversations that got increasingly longer. I don't know if you noticed that, but this was the longest one before next week, where we get 2 whole chapters. But you get to sit for part of that, so don't worry about it. But this then is the 4th week where Jesus has a conversation about a spiritual truth. And the person he's talking to can't get over and understand how he's not talking about a physical truth. And so we first heard of Nicodemus coming to Jesus at night to talk to him about the various things he's teaching. And Jesus tells him that he must be born anew, or born from above, that he must have a spiritual birth to follow him. But Nicodemus just can't seem to get it, and he asks the question, well, how can you be born again? Could you crawl back into your mother's womb and be born once more? That doesn't make any sense. He was thinking physically, and Jesus was teaching spiritually. The next week we heard of the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman at the well, Jesus teaching her about the living water that can well up inside of us, where the Spirit has chosen to dwell, that we might be refreshed always by the presence of God. And she couldn't seem to understand how he wasn't talking about a nice river where she would never have to come back to the well in the middle of the heat of the day and avoid everyone. Wouldn't it be nice to have unlimited physical water? But what he was trying to talk about was the water of life, the spiritual water within us. And last week, we heard of the blind man, the man born blind, being healed. And Jesus talks of the spiritual sight and understanding that he has, where those religious leaders who should have it are the ones who are actually blind. For to see truly and to understand the spiritual reality is to claim that Jesus is indeed the Son of God, the Son of Man, the one coming into the world. And though the Pharisees were able to see Jesus and know his signs, they were blind to the spiritual truth. Whereas the blind man never saw Jesus until the end and came to understand with true understanding who he was. Today, then, our gospel lesson is a misunderstanding about physical death, where Jesus is trying to teach about spiritual death. It starts right at the beginning. Lazarus is ill. Someone that Jesus knows and loves, a friend, the brother of Mary and Martha, and they send word, the one who you love is ill. And immediately Jesus says, this illness will not end in death. And then the next thing we know, Lazarus is dead. So what is Jesus talking about? He's not talking about his physical death exactly, because he continues to say that Lazarus' death is for God's glory, and it is a sign so that the disciples will believe. And what is perhaps more striking, the narrator says that Jesus loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus, so accordingly, or in line with that, he stayed where he was 2 more days. As the Jews rightly claim later on, couldn't he who opened the eyes of the blind man healed Lazarus? Well, the answer is, of course he could have. But because he loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus, because the disciples and those Jews that were mourning needed a sign to believe, because he loved them more than the physical reality than death and wanted them to understand a spiritual death that can only be countered by his life, he stayed and let Lazarus die, to to be the sign to show that he is indeed, as he says to Mary and Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. For Jesus, then, there is something worse than physical death. It's being dead in our spirits. But we might ask then, how is it that we know if we are spiritually dead? How do you know that you are dying? Well, this is not a story about that per se, but it is a way to know how it is that someone might be dead. I heard a story once of a man who was indeed on his deathbed. He'd been lying ill for quite some time. Days were passing, he was getting weaker, and then one morning he woke up, the sun was shining, and the house was filled with the smell of baking cookies. And he knew what was happening. His wife of 50 years, who had baked these delicious chocolate chip cookies every week, their whole marriage, was making him a batch of cookies. And so he throws his legs out of the bed, and he hobbles his way to the stairs and carefully steps down them, gets to the kitchen. He sees a fresh pan sitting there on the cooling rack. He reaches out to grab one, and suddenly his wife smacks his hand out of the way and says, "Don't eat those. Those are for the funeral." He knew he was dying. His wife was getting ready. How do you know you're dying? Your wife's prepping for your funeral dinner. There are signs that we might look at, the marks of our spiritual death. Or maybe it might be better to ask the inverse. If we take true that the opposite of death is life, what are the signs of our spiritual life? Well, Jesus says that he is the life. He is the way, the truth, and the life. So if he is our life, what does his life look like? Well, it looks like the way it is in the Gospels. It looks like taking up our cross and following through the suffering before us, fixed on the glories that are yet to come. It looks like obeying the will of the Father even when it does not line up with our own. It looks like daily dying to ourself, carrying our cross. It looks like doing unto others as we would have them do unto us. It looks like having compassion on those who are lost, like sheep without a shepherd. It looks like giving without thought of receiving, for the Lord sends his rain on the righteous and the unrighteous alike. It looks like loving one another. As Jesus will soon say on the Last Supper, "A new commandment I give you, love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends." So how then do we see if we are spiritually dead or spiritually alive? Well, the question is then, how closely are we following in the way of Jesus, in the way of the cross? How closely are we following him in being self-sacrificial with all that we have? Our things and our life, our time, our treasure, and our talents. How closely are we following him in daily dying to our sins? How closely are we following in loving one another, just as he has loved us? And at the bedrock of all of this is the basic belief and trust that Jesus is who he said he was. That he is indeed the way, the truth, the life, the good shepherd, the light of the world, the one who is to come, the I am. That he is indeed the Son of Man, the Son of God, the Holy One. Or as he says in today's text, those who believe in me, even though they die, will have life. And if they live and believe in me, they will never die. How do we know if we are spiritually alive? Do we believe that Jesus is indeed the way, the truth, and the life? And do we trust him with all that we have and all that we are? May he send his life into us more richly as we prepare again for Easter. Amen.